Welcome to episode number 5 of Trump's America. I'm your host, Mick Larson. On today's podcast, we take a look at the history of DEI and its current status that is under attack from Trump's America. To help me break all that down is Paul LaDipo. He's the CEO and founder at Critical Conversations Consulting. He facilitates training to address and eliminate barriers in the workplace, faith communities, and schools. His curriculum is focused on conversations about racism, colorblindness, and systemic racism, along with promoting diverse, equitable, and inclusive environments. Paul is also a self-described status quo disruptor. That's the ethos I can certainly get on board with. Okay, let's do this. Well, Paul, welcome to the podcast. I'm looking forward to hearing from an expert what DEI is and what it was designed to do. But before I do that, just in the context of our conversation, and as a white male, I just want to say, for the record, that I've always advocated for affirmative action policies, and I certainly advocate for DEI programs. And I see them as an evolution of rights and equality to people who were legally discriminated against because of their gender, race, physical ability, or immigration status. Let's not forget, when this country was founded, only people that look like me, white male with property, could actually vote. Right. So since our country's founding, many Americans have been working tirelessly to expand rights to everyone, while some Americans have been fighting and resisting the expansion of rights, equity, and inclusion. So first, I just want to put that on the record, put that out there for our listeners. But first and foremost, explain to our listeners what DEI is and what it was designed to achieve.
Yeah. So DEI stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it was designed to provide access to people that have been historically and currently marginalized. And so you said yourself, like, this country was founded to serve, straight white men, Christian men who own property. And so ever since then, other groups that didn't fall into those demographics have been trying to catch up. And so the goal of DEI, even before DEI, with civil rights movement and whatnot, the goal was to provide access to people, to qualified people that have been historically denied. And so a lot of people think, let's just shove Black people or brown people into roles. Let's just shove women into random roles. And that's not DEI. That's not true DEI. DEI is, okay, if I have a pool of 10 qualified candidates, and the best candidate happens to be a woman and or a person of color, then fine, let's pick that person. DEI isn't like, let's just grab people off the street and put them in the role. That's not what it's supposed to do. Because for so long, the qualified person that was a woman and or a person of color did not get picked, or they went through more hurdles to get that same position as somebody like yourself, a white male able-bodied person that owns property. And so, yeah, that's what I would describe it as.
And get into the weeds a little bit about, because I don't know the exact mechanics of DEI, and obviously people listening probably don't either, but it's like, if you have candidates that are equally qualified, you're obviously going to try to fill that diversity.
Yeah.
But if there aren't people that are equally qualified, what happens in that space? Or does that really even come up? I guess that's
I don't know. Like if you have two candidates with different demographics are equally qualified, which one you pick, I don't know. I mean, you can think about personality references, because you can have somebody that's qualified, but are they corrupt? Are they immature? And so there's an issue of qualifications. There's personality, and there's also morality to that. So you could have someone that's qualified, but they're just not a people person, or they're qualified, but they're corrupt, arrogant, and you hear word about it, this person's probably not a good person to have. And so, I've never been on that high of a hiring committee in that situation. So I think it would come down to a coin toss or something intangible, or something that we haven't thought of. Like, it could just be that extra reference said something, or this person forgot to give a thank you note. But ideally, if it just you have one best person, and if it's the best person, regardless of race, gender, or sexuality, they get picked. And so as much as I care about affirmative action and DEI, I don't want. The last thing I want is let's just start snatching people that are of color or women, because then that only breeds the animosity that we see now. Because I think that's what people think it is. Like, well, let's just grab people off the street and just shove them in the roles just for the sake of diversity. I'm like, I don't know about that,
Well, and I think that's the point I was trying to get to, is that that's not what it is.
Right.
And it's about evening the playing field and the assets and the positiveness of having a diverse workforce or in that space.
Yeah, exactly.
And I kind of wonder if people, I don't know if it's intellectually dishonest that think that, oh, they're picking people of color, they're picking women that aren't qualified over white men that are qualified. I think that's, I don't, like I said, I think that's probably intellectually dishonest, but I think that's what people have the impression. What are your thoughts about? Is that real? Do you see that, feel that, hear people talk about
Yeah,
that?
I do because there's so many on LinkedIn and Twitter. I used to be on Twitter, but yeah, just like they think like, oh, let's just they quote Martin Luther King about let's judge by the content of character, not by the color of skin. They're like, oh, let's just DIs become let's just if they're black or Hispanic, let's just throw them in roles. And it's like that can't work because if you do that, that's going to harm the individual, the organization, and the movement. And so if you were to start shoving people into random roles because of external characteristics, and that's going to put make it difficult for them and others that come after them. Not to mention you harm the movement. So that's just not a good thing to do.
Not as just, yeah, not a strategic way to go
no,
about it.
no,
And
no.
that's not what it's about. Do you see DEI as a natural evolution of our history of making our country, better and more equitable?
I honestly do. I mean, despite all the backlash, despite all the conflict, and I know this is not going to go away anytime soon. I think we have to play the long game. It's that like change is never accepted without resistance. So think about throughout history. So think about when people thought the Earth was round instead of flat, like those people got persecuted. They got ostracized, and they when scientists first came up and they said XYZ, and religious people were like, no, what are you talking about? You're speaking heresy, and when women first fought for the right to vote, and for equal rights, and that was met with a lot of resistance. And when people tried to end slavery, that was a very hard resistance. It took 200 plus years for slavery to become illegal, and so it's just I don't know how all this is going to last, but it's like I said, it's a natural evolution of society, and there's a lot of people that don't want that either because they don't realize what they're fighting against, or they simply just don't want equality. They get a kick out of seeing another group or another person put down or held down, and so it's just you have to play the long game. It's what it is.
How does DEI work on a campus setting versus a corporate setting?
Boy, that's the interesting question because now with all the laws that are taking them off campus, but so I think DEI is more of like okay, when you have I know some schools what they did was they stopped looking at standardized test scores because they found that standardized test scores are biased. So like if you went to a very rich school, a prep school that prepped you well for the ACT or SAT, and those students are disproportionately white and rich, and so you could take those tests and just do a lot better. So you may not be smarter than a kid from a poor neighborhood, but your test scores are going to be better because you've had the preparatory work. And so a lot of what schools were doing is they were either not really looking at standardized test scores or they looked at other things besides test scores. And so and that was the point of race-based admissions was like, okay, there are qualified kids that go to poor black and brown schools, but they just don't have the preparation that these other schools had. So they admit qualified students, but because you call it race-based, people think that like, oh, only because of their race, not just the fact these kids are actually qualified. So I think that's what it looks like in a university setting. Also, just having multicultural resource centers, like having the Black Student Union or the Latino Student Union or LGBTQ Resource Center, because realizing that our students have represent a diverse body, and so but that diverse body has different needs, and so LGBTQ plus students have different needs than straight students, and Black students have different needs than Asian students a lot of times, and so those are groups designed to cater to their needs, but a lot of people that don't know DI are against it, like, oh, why are you quartering up students like this? And it's like, well, these students exist whether you acknowledge it or not. And so if there's a group that cares to Black culture, Black history events, then let them be a part of that. And it doesn't mean that other people can't attend, but just be mindful. So
I think it's really the irony of how many people, people like Sam Harris, people like Bill Maher, who just hate identity politics and say we got to end identity. And I want to go, yeah. In theory, I get that, but in practice, that's what our country is founded on: identity politics. If you're white and a property owner, you can vote. and then for hundreds of years, that's the way it went. So our country is founded on identity politics, and to think that it's not is it's you're confused to some degree.
Yeah, yeah. Or in denial, either one. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Denial's probably appropriate. What was your journey from university academic advisor to work in the DEI space?
Sure. So I was I was an academic advisor for I think first year, second year students, and my students would just kind of open up about what they felt about the university. Like, oh, I feel like kind of out of place here because it was the university setting was a mostly white, politically and religiously conservative area, and so I mean nobody was trying to dismantle DEI or anything, but I think a lot of students of color and LGBTQ plus students and students that are from historically marginalized backgrounds, they felt a little weird and out of place, and so they said, hey, I got called this slur, or this resource center could do a better job, or hear my experiences growing up. They just opened up to me. I'm glad they saw me as a person to do that. So like we talk about math and chemistry and whatnot, and then after that they open up, and so I'm like, oh, okay, I'm really intrigued by this. So I don't really care about Math 241 anymore. Not that I didn't want my students to succeed, because I did, but I just lost interest in the coursework they were taking. And I became more interested in their personal stories and why they felt discriminated against. And so that was my journey, and that kickstarted it.
Then talk a little bit about how different counseling students is compared to working in the DEI space.
Yeah, so I think well, there's a lot of similarities because so like in that academic advice role, they'd open up about sexual harassment or homophobia or racism or whatever. But in the DEI space, if you're working with in higher ed, a lot of students are going to bring those to you because they're going to look at your office, your position as like, okay, this guy cares about DEI. He's here for all students. I'm going to open up on my stories, and it could backfire, not depending on the individual hearing this, but it's like it's a lot of similarities because you're still taking care of students and people from marginalized backgrounds. So like you're not advising them on what course to take, but there's a bit of personal I don't like saying counseling because I'm not a licensed counselor, but there's some personal coaching, some motivation, some motivational coaching there. So it's actually a lot of similarities.
It sounds very rewarding.
Yeah, it really is. I feel like making a difference in somebody's life, because like you don't always know what difference you make in somebody's life. They may tell you, they may not, but yeah, I said on LinkedIn, like, don't underestimate your influence, don't underestimate your impact, because somebody may not tell you, but it doesn't mean you haven't impacted them.
What were the students' initial reactions to DEI programs, and then how did that interaction evolve?
I think like when I was in higher ed, people, it wasn't a dirty word, so most people were for it. I mean, there were cases where like I would send emails to different organizations, like Greek organizations, and sometimes students would block my emails, and then they would tell me this, but mostly it was positive. It was like, I want to know about this. What is this going on? And then the pendulum was swinging in the good direction, and then 2020, 2021 hit, and it swung the other direction. So when I was on campus, it was a good feeling. Like now, I'm not envious of what these people on campus, these DI folks on campuses are going through. So,
what were some of the biggest DEI benefits you saw develop for the students?
Yeah, gender inclusive restrooms. I was that various history months, and so we had celebration of Black History Month, and so Asian Heritage Month, and Indigenous and Hispanic Month, and so just seeing the different activities and programs that we put on to acknowledge our diverse student body.
I'm sure you saw this meme recently, like white people, like, how come they get a whole month and we only get one day? Maybe it was veterans. I don't, plug in whatever you want.
Yeah,
but
it's like, how can you get
talk about that.
Out of the year? And it was like, why do white people get 11 months out of the year and Black people get 1 month, I think, or something like that. But so I think so some people see Black history like, why does it have to be Black history? There isn't a White History Month. It's like, well, you don't have to call it White History Month, but even myself, when I was growing up, the curriculum that I took, it was like, you learn U.S. history or world history, and it was heavily Eurocentric, like it's through the view of written by colonial settlers. If not that, then what happened in Europe from the perspective of the British and the French and the other major Europeans in power. So it's like you may get a sense of world history, you get U.S. history, but it's like it's written from the perspective of of white men, or some cases white women. And so we learned a bit about MLK and Rosa Parks and Frederick Douglass, but it's bits and pieces, and then we learned about the Vietnam War a little bit, and so but it's just like it's like whose perspective is this, and what material do you cover? Like the Tulsa riots.
Right.
I didn't know about that. I didn't hear about that until maybe my 30s, late 20s, 30s. It's really blurry. And then I know some years ago, um, on Twitter, it came viral. Like somebody, I forget what show did an episode about the Tulsa riots, but people were like, "Oh, I never learned about this in school," But that was hidden. The sundown towns and
Mm-hmm.
uh, all that stuff that wasn't really talked about. It was very watered down, very or gone altogether. So yeah,
Yeah, it's like same thing with Juneteenth. Like I'm
yeah,
sure
exactly.
nobody knew about Juneteenth
I
until
didn't, I
someone
didn't learn
brought
about
attention to
Juneteenth
it.
until, I mean, I heard about Juneteenth in my 20s, but I didn't really know about it until my 30s. And I'm 44, so I just turned 44. So yeah, it's just missed out on a lot.
What were some of the initial challenges of rolling out DI programs, and how did that evolve?
What are the initial challenges of DEI?
Yeah, yeah. Was there any pushback or just some
Oh,
of the challenges,
yeah, I
if at
say
all?
when I was in higher ed, the biggest pushback wasn't necessarily for race or gender. It was more for trans people, LGBTQ people, because the campus, another campus where I worked was also conservative, and so and this we had students that would tear down the gender neutral bathroom signs, and so we put them up, and they once after dark when we go home, they snatch them down and all over again. And you have to be careful. It's one thing when a coworker or let's say an adult on the street does something, but a student is difficult to discipline because the school makes money off of each student, and so if it's a student that comes from a wealthy family and they're paying $30,000 a year, that's stupid to kick them out, and so you just give him a slap on the wrist, and he complained to my boss and sent emails and he was hostile, and I'm just like, okay, sure, let him be heard, and we put him right back up and he turned right back down. So, but the issue then was LGBTQ, and I just think that because we're a conservative campus, like politically and religiously, that just irked a lot of people.
What about in the corporate space as far as challenges and I don't, I don't know
Yeah,
if you can talk to that or not, but I'm just curious if how that.
yeah. So I've had limited access in corporate space. So I've had some being a consultant, an independent consultant, but from listening to people talk, there's more of just lack of support, or they put all their responsibility on the DEI person. And so let's say you're the chief diversity officer or whatever, manager of diversity inclusion at Samsung or whatever big name company. They'll throw a lot of dollars at you, but everything is on you. You don't get much support. Um, the trainings get iffy when you start talking about white privilege and white supremacy. People squirming, and then all of a sudden you got a CEO or a number of board members that don't like what you said, and then all the office politics so you can keep your job. And so it's very like financially it's very good, you're in a good physical position, but it's like there's a lot of eggshell stepping to keep your job.
I Yeah, that would be crazy. I mean, it would
Yeah,
just be
yeah.
so tough to work in that environment.
Yeah, because it's like they're thinking of like I'm not paying you 150K to tell me I'm racist. I mean, if you're being thrown 150K, it's like you better do what I tell you to do or do it in a nice way because it's like I'll find somebody else or I don't have to give you 150K. And so it becomes a really tough dance.
Well, that kind of begs the question in the corporate world, is DEI being implemented seriously, or is it window dressing from what you've seen?
Yeah, from what I've seen and from what people have said, it's a lot of window dressing. I don't want to assume that this is the case for everybody because that's not fair. I don't think that's possible. But I trust the word of people that have worked in those spaces and they've said yes. I've had to really, really get good at navigating those tough waters, walking that fine line because I could lose my job or just start this he said she said drama, in the office. And so it's just like yeah, if you're gonna put on a nice outfit and make 150K and work for a Forbes 500 company, you know.
And that was my next question, was like, how do you ensure that DEI programs go beyond compliance and actually create cultural change?
Honestly, I think a lot of it's going to have to do doing DEI outside of your 9 to 5 role. Like for me, I would like to be in a 9 to 5 DI role, but given what we just talked about, that's so stressful. And I think for a lot of people, um, doing DI work outside of their work. So for me, being on LinkedIn, for some people, going to the local government and pushing for change, and so policy making, things like that. At home, teaching your kids being anti-racist, like it's nice to have a 9 to 5 DI role, but because of all the politics we just mentioned, it's tough and it's going to get a lot tougher. So it's like, you know what? Let's step outside of our 9 to 5 roles and let's do DEI work there. So let's like with my sons, and my son's biracial. So my wife, she has conversations with our son, with the oldest, about race and culture, and Toby notices the difference. He's 6, but he notices the difference in himself and others. And so having conversations and thinking about like, okay, what kind of world do we want him to live in? And me being on LinkedIn, let me talk to leaders. So if HR managers and CEOs and policymakers see my post, I'm like, oh, that might affect them, And so even though I'm not in a 9 to 5 role, I feel like I do my best work outside of a 9 to 5 role.
So this just popped in my head based on what you just said. And I was like, I'm really curious why people are so offended about history and the facts of what actually happened, because it's not anything personal. It's just like, hey, this is how our country has operated.
Yeah.
And these are effects of, structural racism, institutional racism. And so, here's what we're doing to fix them, and address them. And but I kind of wonder if it was coming from, I don't know how many DEI officers are white or, what the percentage are, but I kind of that's what popped in my head. Is like, I wonder if that would sound better coming from a white guy.
I do. I think a lot of people, I don't know where I saw this, but I think that it's hard to change until people learn America's true. The reason why people keep making the same mistake is they don't learn the true history. And so I think people don't want or don't want to learn true history because they don't want their illusion shattered, or they like a lot of people worship America. It's like, and yes, I love America. This is where you're born. We're all American. American born, American dead. I get it, but it's like you can like something or you can love something, or something can be good and have its bad qualities. And so you can have I say it could be a relationship, a friendship, a job, a boss. The things that you like about it, the things that you don't like about it. And just because there are things that you don't like about it doesn't mean that the whole thing is bad. And I think people, they throw out the baby with the bathwater. It's like, okay, if we say America was racist or founded on genocide, then we must be a bad country or we must be bad people. It's like not necessarily true, but it's like you got to take that good with the bad so you can really learn things so you don't do it again, because you don't learn from mistakes, you're going to do the same thing over and over again. And so, and I think for a lot of people, it's just like the curriculum they got and what they were taught in 4th of July barbecues that, America and greatest nation. And, we started with freedom. Like, no, we didn't. But it's like they had this image in their head, what they were taught in the DEI and critical race theory and wokeism and all that stuff. It just, it shatters the illusion. They don't want that. So it's like, nope, not dealing with that.
Yeah, they are definitely on a different narrative, even though it's not based in fact. And you bring up a good point about if you don't teach your history, and obviously we've had a recent backlash against teaching an accurate version of our history.
Right.
What do you think about that backlash?
I think a lot of it. So aside from them not wanting their illusion shattered and them learning something different, I think a lot of it just comes out of emotional intelligence. And so I've said many times that it's hard to achieve racial, gender, whatever equity without emotional intelligence, and because these topics stir up a lot of strong emotions in people, and so especially people from privileged backgrounds or demographics, and it's like, and so when you hear George Washington had slaves' teeth ripped out and made him his dentures or whatever, that's jarring. That's not a pleasant, George Washington is the father of our country and cannot tell a lie, and but hearing that either he or had somebody else ripped out the teeth of slaves and make his own teeth, it's like wait a minute, that shatters that godlike father figure, because that's a terrible thing to do, and so actually, when you hear about George Washington wearing the teeth of slaves, when you hear about Tulsa riots, when you hear about skinning somebody alive that try to escape a plantation, it's like what are those emotions? Is it anger? Is it fear? Is it disgust? Is it shame? What is an emotion? What are you feeling? Why are you feeling? And how can you navigate out of it? So like, yeah, a lot of my work is emotional intelligence work. It's like, well, yeah, I don't like hearing about that either, but it's like, here we are. It's like, okay, what are you feeling, and how can you navigate yourself out of that? And I think a lot of the backlash is just typical. Oh, let's stuff it down, or let's avoid it. And it's like, and it's the same problems. I'm going on a tangent, but it's like, it's a relationship problem, like with marriage,
Sure.
friendships, work relationships. You're like, oh, there's a problem. Let's just let's bat to the side, and then it festers until people leave or fight or whatever. And so it's just unhealthy.
Well, if you don't teach the history, you don't have to admit you have a problem, and the bigger issue is that you don't have to fix it.
Right, there we
And
go.
so what we're dealing with now, those folks that don't want to deal with the history and really understand what structural racism is, institutional racism, they're the ones like, well, I'm not racist, and that may be true. They're not racist against certain types of people, but that doesn't mean racism doesn't exist. It just,
Right.
for them, they don't, and they probably don't interact with a lot of people that look different than them anyway. So it's easy for them not to be
Yeah.
think of themselves as racist. So that's what we're really battling, I think, at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's. I think that people, they're afraid if they read this or if they learn more, they're like, oh, I must be racist, or oh, I must be a bad person. And I try to tell people, let's step beyond the good bad binary. But like, this whole like, okay, racism's bad, being not racist is good. So it's like, if I do say something racist, I must be a bad person. It's like not necessarily true. I mean, good people have biases, good people make mistakes, good people create spaces of exclusion. I mean, it comes down to motivations of what willing to learn from your mistakes. But it's like, we gotta stop thinking that racism is only done by evil people or bad people, or that if I did, I must be bad. It's not necessarily true. It's just that also defining what racism is isn't just hatred. It's about behavior or speech patterns or whatever that marginalizes a group that's been historically marginalized. So it's like, they're like, I don't hate black people. I'm like, well, okay, so you don't hate black people, good, but do you have any attitudes or stereotypes, or do you have any behaviors that marginalize black people? Then that's still racist. I don't want to call you racist, but that behavior, what you said or done, might be racist. So it's just a huge cognitive dissonance and just lack of emotional intelligence and knowing what racism is, and just like, it's just something that I think all of this is just showing that America is still not ready yet. And so I guess somebody will hit bottom and we'll finally be ready to have that conversation. But I can see with my own eyes that America is still not ready. And a lot of people aren't ready, and they don't want to be ready.
Yeah. And I've been thinking the last couple of weeks after the election of Donald Trump that the liberals, the Democratic Party, it's not our business necessarily to try to change people's racist minds or racist attitudes or racist behaviors. It's our job to provide answers to problems, bigger problems. And it's kind of like, we need to drop the personal, like, this person's racist, or yeah, they may be racist, but that's not really, we can't do anything about that. So let's do programs, whether that's universal healthcare that helps racist people, it helps non-racist people, it helps everybody. And I kind of wonder if that's where we need to start migrating towards, because we're not in the business of changing minds, psychologically.
I mean, I think with I agree and disagree. So I think only talking about identity politics, like talking about that 24/7, that doesn't help anybody, because that's just overkill, and that's just fatigue, And so, but like, we need to. So let's not sell an entire party or a candidate only on identity politics. But I think if Kamala would have, or the Democratic Party would have paid attention to people's needs, because people are motivated by a paycheck. I don't think that some people were motivated by self. They were motivated by racism. They don't want to know anything about racism. Fine, but a lot of people, a good portion of the population, they're trying to make a paycheck because inflation is so freaking high. And so, when the Democratic Party didn't stop and think, well, okay, what do our voters need? Like, in fact, I even remember last year around this time, I was reading a paper back in the late 2023, and it interviewed a number of people around the country, everyday people, and they were worried about finances and being buy groceries, and back then they were like, yeah, I don't know if Biden can take care of this. So I might have to vote for Trump. And sure enough, That's what happened because it's like the GOP party. Say what you want to about Trump and GOP. They know people's motivations. Like so hunger, gas prices, fear of wokeism, whatever. They knew how to get people's votes. So in the Democratic Party, they didn't think about like, okay, our supporters want to pay the bills. They want to buy groceries. They want to be able to pump gas in the car. And on top of that, they also need to know about racism and sexism. And so it's like I'm not a political mastermind. I don't know how I would have done it, but it's like, I think like that's a lesson on Democratic Party or whatever party going forward is that where are your voters at and what do they need? You can push other agendas once you've hit their core needs, and so I think also the crisis in Palestine, and I think a lot of Gen Z, a lot of younger voters, a lot of people set out because they didn't like Kamala's policies on Palestine, and so for Trump's base, I'm not sure that was their. I don't know if that was their worry, but like for a lot of liberal people, especially Gen Z, especially Muslim or allies to Palestinians, they were like, Kamala, what's your stance on this? And so I don't know how many votes she lost because of that, but I wouldn't be surprised if that was a factor in her not getting more votes. So
And it's also complicated because, and I think it's a messaging problem because obviously Democratic Party is doing things to affect people's paycheck issues, whether it be healthcare. I mean,
yeah,
I have ACA, Obamacare, and it's amazing. And imagine it being gone is very frightful. So,
yeah,
that's a mess. And obviously Republicans have been trying to get rid of it since it's came into existence. So that is for everybody. And it definitely works for paycheck to paycheck folks for
uh-huh.
sure. And that the Democratic Party is very supportive of unions, which provide well-paying jobs, and what the Biden administration just I think got the longshoremen a 60% increase in wages
Yeah,
over their agreement with the longshoremen. And here we have Trump just saying he's going to dissolve the labor organization. So it's like there is a disconnect here because it's
yeah,
not
yeah.
like Democrats aren't doing things to help
Right,
the
right,
paycheck to
right,
paycheck
right.
people, but they're not
Those people may not
winning
be
the.
aware of it. I think a lot of people when they're trying to when they pay $150 for groceries, they're not thinking, oh, the Democrats have put these in place. They're just thinking about food and eating. They're not thinking about, oh, Obamacare and the acts that you talked about. They're just thinking like, and so like, yeah, and so they're not thinking about that because either they don't use Obamacare or they take it for granted. But yeah, if your mind is focused on, oh, cookies went up 27%, then that's what you got to talk about. Even though you have all this in the background, you have all this, you have Obamacare and all the stuff you talked about. They're thinking, oh, I'm paying, I don't know, $8 for a bag of Oreos. So it just, yeah, it's something else.
Sorry, I got us off track here a little bit, but I'll get us back here. What do you see DEI being misunderstood by the general public?
Oh yeah, I think what fed the backlash is that you had smart racists or smart bigots, however you want to call it. They know what DI is, but they twisted the meaning of it to appeal to the people that aren't informed. And so you have a lot of people that have opinions on DI, whether it's lay person or athletes or celebrities, and I'm listening to them talking like this is a DI. What you heard was from what Trump said, what Christopher Rufo said, what Bill Ackman said, what Edward Bloom said, or these influential conservatives, far right conservatives have said. And so like in fact, I remember arguing with a woman on LinkedIn, and she was like talking about anti-racism, like you don't know what anti-racism is. And she's like, oh, but I do, and I'm thinking, no, you don't, because what you said mirrors what the people what rumors they've been spreading for the past 3 years, and so, but you picked up on it and you bought into it, so it's like I'm not going to change your mind, so I'm not going to argue with you anymore. But um, yeah, I mean, it's like a lot of people don't know what DEI is, but they hear that term and it's like a trigger word because of what somebody else said, and they don't like it. They don't know what it is, but they don't like it.
Well, that brings us to the, you know, talking about, woke, CRT, DEI. And you've got people like when Kamala got the nomination, some Republican legislators said she was a DEI hire, um, extremely racist,
Yeah, yeah.
but talk a little bit about that, how the right demonizes these words and turns them into what they aren't. I mean, it's gaslighting, obviously.
Yeah. So it's like if you say something enough times or use it in a negative way, you change the meaning of it. So like, so let's say meaning of woke, being mindful of injustice, of racial injustice. I mean, it's applied to sexism and homophobia as well. But like, woke, original purest definition as being attuned to racial injustice. And let's say that any initiative or anything you do is all called woke. You know, so I could have a be drinking some, a bottle of Minute Maid juice, and let's say the company donates their money to poor people, like, oh, let's call this woke Kool-Aid, woke juice, and um, let's say that Friends, assuming that was somebody, they have a black character, oh, not woke, now Friends is gone woke, and then so it's kind of you poking fun of it, but over time it just turns into this negative thing, and so like let's say
It becomes toxic.
yeah, it's just like let's say that now McDonald's is gonna cut back on trans fats. Like, oh, now McDonald's is gone woke, and just like now it's just you just butchered the meaning of it. Now it sounds anything, and now it sounds unpleasant, and so it's just use it out of context and use it out of context enough times. It first becomes a joke, then it becomes an insult, and pejorative. So,
And I guess to me, we could set the record straight on CRT. I mean, that's a college level
right
thing. This has not, they're not teaching that to our
oh
kids.
that's why I remember back in late 2020, early 2021, CRT hit the airwaves. I'm like, man, and I don't want my kids learning this. Like, well, your kids weren't learning it in the first place. I mean, and so that also, so in fact, there was a tweet by Christopher Rufo. Somebody snapshotted. I don't know who this person was, but they snapshot. It was a conversation where he was like, "We're going to toxify that brand." So whenever they hear CRT, they're going to think X, Y, Z, and so and it worked because it's like a book about black kids. Oh, that's CRT, and a book about indigenous genocide. Oh, that's CRT, and you call it, like I said, with the woke Kool-Aid and the woke juice. It's like you overuse it to the point that now it's like it becomes this all-encompassing term. And then when it becomes all-encompassing, it's an insult. It's a slur. It's just like this catch-all phrase for anything that somebody may not like, And so it's brilliant, racistly brilliant, So
You kind of touched on this, but when did you feel and see and hear DEI really come in under attack?
As soon as the CRT wave started, because I knew where it's like. Dare I use an example of a machine gun or a missile? It's like it's just a splash damage. As soon as CRT became a bad name, I knew that DEI and anti-racism and all their cousins, they were going to get it too, because they're interconnected. And so in early 2021, when people were like, "Oh, CRT's in the schools and whatnot," I was like, "Man, this is going to have it's going to come down to DEI as well." And sure enough, it did.
What do you think the motivation? I mean, we know, but I'm kind of curious. What do you think the motivation is for those folks that demonize these legitimate topics or words like woke, DEI, CRT? What's their end game?
I think they don't they want to either set us back to the earlier time, or they don't want racial equality. They want equality in terms of, oh yeah, we're all created equal, and yeah, we are, but they want to stop at that. They just want yeah, we're all created by the same God or the same creator, we all bleed the same blood, we're all American. They just want that kumbaya, simplistic, nothing challenges me definition of equality. So I mean, they're because they love people that say that, like the posts on Facebook, and they actually were like, oh, there was one of like had a row of 6 or 7 skeletons. It's like, can you tell any of these apart by race or gender? I'm like, well, yeah, you can tell a woman's skeleton from a man's skeleton, but like, can you tell us that this person was straight or gay or lesbian or black or Asian? And like, well, for forensic scientists can tell the difference between a black and an Asian person. They can't. There's minor skeletal differences, but what they're getting at is it's like we're all created equal, yada yada, which I get, but it's like it doesn't get to the bottom of anything. Great, we share 99% of our DNA with each other. Good, I know that. I'm not stupid, But like at the end of the day, are we going to talk about something that creates inequities, or are we just going to tell each other that we create equally? Because like we can keep telling each other that all day long, but you're not getting to the bottom of anything. And that's what they want. They want that counterfeit DEI because it sounds nice. It's not chat. That's what they want.
Exactly. Another thing that you brought up that I really like is like personal DEI. So what would be your advice to people that, aren't in the university or corporate setting, like personally doing DEI?
I'll say you're doing good work. Like I know it's tempting to want that title or the salary that comes with it. Like for me, like I can be if I can be honest, I get insecure because like man, it'd be nice if I had a nice corporate job, or if I was a chief diversity officer at a big research one institution. Like the title and the salary, it's nice. And but it's
Stability.
like yeah, it's stability. For now. I mean, we'll see what happens in the next 6 months to a year, but but it's like you can still do good work outside of that. Like think about any revolution. So like be it women's right to vote, ending slavery, same-sex rights. Yeah, you have people working their jobs doing that, but people outside their jobs. So like the marchers and the protesters and the activists and the people that spread the word and the people that educated themselves and people that taught their kids about these groups. It's like we all play a role in this. So it's still important.
What what do you hope to see with DEI over the next 5 or 10 years?
I'm hoping that the pendulum swings the other direction. I'm hoping that um, that because of what's going to happen in the new administration, it becomes so toxic and drastic that the pendulum is forced to move the other direction. So, like, I think back beginning of 2020 when the COVID pandemic started, a lot of DI people lost their jobs. Because companies were slashing and like, oh, losing money or just slashing budgets, trying to conserve the money. And so a lot of DI people got sent to the curb, and a lot of DI positions got yanked from the internet. But then once George Floyd was murdered, they came back in full force. That pendulum swung back really far left, and so again, I'm not wishing for any tragedy or anything, but I'm hoping that something is a catalyst. This new administration will spark something, it'll be a catalyst, and people will see that there's a need for DEI. Because I'm a believer that that DEI is designed to be a guardrail, and so when you remove that guardrail, you get these people that are like, ever since Trump got elected, people are marching in the streets spewing slurs, and Nick Fuentes is like, your body, my choice. And it's like, that encourages bad behavior, and all this bad behavior. I wanted to get to a point where people are like, oh, wow, this is why we need DEI because of stuff like this. And so,
Yes, Trump has given Americans the permission structure to be the worst versions of every American.
yeah, I know, man. It's like, and people still don't get it because I know like people have posted about the march in Columbus, Ohio last
Yeah.
weekend.
Hmm.
And they're like, oh, the people just like, how could this happen? I'm like, well, who just got elected? He's not going to march in the streets, but his rhetoric motivates people to do that.
Well, Paul, there's good people on both sides, man.
Yeah, I know, but um, you know, Trump doesn't care if he does say something because people are pushing him to say something, but he doesn't give a crap. He
Oh, yeah.
he's just smart enough not to get to join them in the streets, but yeah, his sentiments aren't that far off.
That reminds me of something that just happened where, Matt Gaetz withdrew his
Oh,
nomination for attorney general. And I got to think because of sexual issues.
it's
And I got to
kind
thinking in a sarcastic, cynical way. I was like, what's the problem? We elected a guy that's an actual convicted
of yeah,
sexual
I know.
harasser. Why can't this guy be attorney general? Obviously, I
Unless,
don't want him to
unless he
be
did
attorney.
unless he did worse, and so he did worse things than what Trump did, and he doesn't have the immunity that Trump has because Trump has a cult of personality where he can do anything and people will stick by. But I'm not sure Gates has that same pull, and so he's like, nope, I'm gonna save my own skin. I'm stepping out. So,
Well, what anything we should be talking about that I didn't ask you about, Paul?
uh, I guess like I know when we first chatted, I talked about like what happened to the Republican Party. If you don't mind, I could like to share that
Oh,
with
yeah,
people.
yeah.
So I think
Fire
like
away.
so like I've never voted Republican, but like I like to use a story about when I was a TA, a graduate teaching assistant at a university. One of my favorite students was a diehard George W. Bush fan, and so even though I never voted for Bush and didn't plan on it, she and I were cool. And I think that had I been our TA, we could have been friends or something. But she and I clicked really well. We were professional, whatever, professional friends, and it's like I realized that was strictly ideological. And so um, and like I would if I could talk to more Republicans, it'd be like, what happened to the Republican Party of 10, 20, 30 years ago? Like think of like the first Bush 40, so Bush 41, W, Bob Dole, John McCain. They weren't
Mitt
doing
Romney.
Mitt Romney. They weren't, you know, they weren't like talking about African nations being crap hole countries. They weren't talking about immigrants eating dogs. They weren't calling COVID a China virus. They weren't. I mean, I'm not saying they were perfect ancestors of the word, but it's like they weren't doing this. They weren't trying to eliminate DEI, and so it's like I want to know how many Republicans do you realize like how far you moved to the right? Like further extremists over the past 10, 20 years. It's like I don't know. I mean, so even though I don't, I guess if the right Republican candidate come out, I would vote for him depending on the situation. But it's like, what happened to the Republican Party of yesteryear? And so, and I was glad prior to the election, there were a number of Republicans that say, you know what, I can't vote for this guy. Like I've been a Republican all my life. I'm not going to vote for Trump. I'm like, yes, you see that just because you're a Republican does not mean you're obligated to vote for this candidate because look what this person does. And so, I don't know. So I don't know if I'll ever get that chance, but I would like to have a conversation with more Republicans. Like, hey, do you see what's happening here? What happened to? I would long for a George W. Bush or a Bob Dole compared to Trump. So I don't
Trump
know.
is making W look really good. And the irony of that is like, as bad as Trump is, at least he didn't invade a country under false pretenses and kill, 300,000 Iraqis, which is bizarre to say, but
yeah. So I don't know. It's just like, man, I don't know. Somebody once said it, but I don't know who this was, but like, yeah, the Republican Party needs to divorce itself from Trump, and I don't know if and how they can do that, but if they can do that, get themselves back on track.
I would say, based on what you just said, it's really weird that the never Trumpers, the sane Republicans like Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, folks like the Lincoln Project, and all the Democrats that how did Kamala not win?
Yeah,
because you've got a lot of old school Republicans like you're talking about. They voted for Harris. So yeah, it's one of the weirdest times, and I'm sure it'll be the weirdest time of my lifetime. Trying to figure out, what's going on and how. And I think, and I've said this before, this is where the problem is that when you had a W or H Bush, they were decent people, and their policies, they weren't putting people down like immigrants. George W. Bush spoke Spanish, and he spoke Spanish at rallies and stuff, and so he increased the Latino vote. But so the problem is you've got a terrible person as the head of the Republican Party, just one of the worst citizens America's ever produced. And you've got him separating children at the border and doing, trying to deport people. So that's where the problem is. Like when you go to Thanksgiving, for me, most of my family voted for Trump. It's just like, this is way different than George W. This is awful version of the Republican Party.
Yeah, it's like what you take something, you morph it to some nth degree of, I don't know what, but it's like, do you see how far? Like, do you remember W, and do you remember Bob Dole and John McCain? In fact, John McCain, before he passed, John McCain was like, I don't like Trump. But if I'm wrong, correct me if I'm wrong. But John McCain was like,
you're right.
No. So it's like, I didn't vote for John McCain, but still, like, listen to John McCain. He knows what he's talking about. So it's like, do you see where your party has gone here? And so I don't know. I don't know what's going to take the GOP party to realize like, hey, we need to scale it back, but like it's so far gone, and it's only Trump, but his acolytes, a lot of Republicans copy him, and so it's like you deal with him, but you got other people that think like him or try to be like him, and it's just like, man, I don't know, maybe somebody should form the new Republican Party or something. I don't know, just a third branch, a third party of the new Republican Party. I don't know, but just to somehow divorce itself from this. This is so nasty.
Well, Paul, we have John McCain to thank for the thumbs down on the ACA vote because he saved Obamacare, the ACA, in the Senate, and that's why Trump hates him so much.
Yeah.
Well, and like you said, we don't know what's going to happen, but we unfortunately or fortunately, we are living in Trump's America, and that's why I named this podcast, Trump's America, even though I didn't choose it. I definitely want to talk to folks like you and try to understand, what is going on in Trump's America. And, I'd love to have you back on. We'll see how progress goes over the next few years. And we'll find out what's going to happen.
Yeah, hopefully we'll still be able to meet and talk on this podcast.
They're going to come after me first. No.
Oh boy.
Well, thanks, Paul. I appreciate your experience, your knowledge, and helping everyone really understand what DEI, is and what it was designed for.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
All right. We will talk later.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks. All right, that does it for this week's episode. I want to thank Paul again for sharing his knowledge and expertise on DEI and his observations on our culture. Thanks for checking out the podcast. Have a great week and take care.